Good to have you with us. Well, the war in Ukraine is top of the agenda at a meeting of EU leaders in Denmark today. They're taking part in two summits focused on security and defence. Those talks in Copenhagen, of course, coming after a series of mysterious drone sightings forced a temporary closure of Danish airports. The EU leaders are also looking at proposals for a so-called drone wall to try to protect the continent. The summit is also the first opportunity for leaders of the EU's 27 countries to debate a proposal to use Russian assets frozen in Europe to fund a loan of 140 billion euros to Ukraine. Well, Keravan Gorjestani, our foreign affairs editor, is here with us. Let's dive a bit deeper then into some of those things. This drone wall, the so-called drone wall, is everybody on board with that?
Well, look, most Europeans agree that Russian threats have increased in recent months, whether it's drones, fighter jets, cyber attacks, election interference. But the question is, how does Europe defend itself against those threats? And right now, as you said, the big focus is on the so-called drone wall because of those recent incidents, whether it's in Denmark or in other countries. And the agreement in Europe is that using multi-million fighter jets to go shoot down cheap drones is not a cost-efficient way of defending Europe and of dealing with that specific threat. The European Commission chief, Ursula von der Leyen, that you see there on those images, and the Baltic states, who are obviously in the front line of Russian attacks, are pushing for that so-called drone wall. But the problem is that there's little detail as to what exactly that actually means and how it would actually work. However, not everybody's in agreement. You have, for example, the Germans as well as the French, who are pretty skeptical about this drone wall, with a French official from the Elysee telling reporters and asking sort of rhetorically, what does a drone wall mean? Are we talking about a wall of drones, or are we talking about an anti-drone wall? So there's still a lot of debate as to what everybody is talking about when they say drone wall. There's also disagreement as to who should foot the bill if that drone wall were to actually be done. The Baltic states say, look, we're already spending quite a lot on our defense, and our defense is your defense. So now the European Union should be chipping in. There's also disagreement on who should be in charge of big defense projects in Europe. Obviously, the European Commission believes that it should be its job to sort of organize that defense project like the drone wall. But other big countries, especially in Europe, like France, Germany, Italy, they believe that defense should be coordinated among national capitals and not in Brussels. So we're not there yet. And that is causing a lot of frustration, especially among the Baltic states, who have been the first ones at the forefront, even before the summer, calling for that drone wall. And the Lithuanian president just saying, documents do not detect drones. We need action right now and not more discussion.
Another issue you mentioned earlier was this idea of using frozen Russian assets. That seems to be gaining momentum. I think we have a soundbite of Ursula von der Leyen talking about that today in Copenhagen. Let's take a listen to that.
We have to increase the pressure on Russia. And this is why I have proposed reparation loans for Ukraine on the basis of the immobilized Russian assets. We are not confiscating the assets, but we are taking the cash balances for loan to Ukraine. Ukraine has to pay back this loan if Russia pays reparations because the perpetrator has to be held accountable.
So is it likely to happen, this idea?
Well, look, what are we talking about exactly? So far, the Europeans have touched the proceeds of the Russian frozen assets, but there's been quite a lot of discussion about the assets themselves. There's $140 billion or so held in Belgium of Russian assets. And when Ursula von der Leyen talks about those reparation loans, how would that work? Basically, the Europeans would seize that amount of money in Belgium from the Russian assets, send it as a loan to the Ukrainians with 0% interest. And then in the event that A, the war ends, and B, the Russians pay reparations, then and only then would the Ukrainians have to repay the loan to the Europeans. This is, of course, coming because the Europeans want to continue to support the Ukrainians, but they also know that that costs money, and they don't want to turn back to their own taxpayers and say, well, you need to finance our support for Ukraine. And what they're saying and arguing is that it should be Russia who, in the end, would have to pay for the destruction and for what it's doing in Ukraine. The move has support from a lot of corners, starting by the Commission, but of course also the Baltic states were very much in favor of that, but also of more Western European countries, if you will. The Germans seem to be pretty much on board. The Danish Prime Minister herself saying that it was a good idea. That's what she said. But she also acknowledged that there were still legal questions that needed to be addressed. And that's really what has so far been the major sticking point, is the legality of seizing those frozen Russian assets. They're big opponents like Belgium, of course, because those assets are held in Belgian institutions, but also countries like France, who have warned that this might be going against international law, that this might undermine the credibility of the European financial system, and also ultimately potentially scaring off investors in Europe. Add to that the fact that technically it seems that this move would need unanimous approval, and there you have the usual suspects that are closer to Moscow than they are to Brussels, like Hungary or Slovakia, who will likely oppose that. But Ursula von der Leyen believes that there's a way around it. The Commission believes they can get a way around it and could pass the move with only a qualified majority. The question is, A, is that feasible? And B, do they actually have the qualified majority to do that? But once again, if we go back to those words by the Lithuanian president, and when we talk about Europe, it often seems to be the case, still a lot of discussion, still not a decision or action, and this thing is likely not going to be decided by the end of the day.
Okay, thanks very much.